Okay, great. So just for the recording, I'll just say welcome to the Gift of Tensions in Our Groups, organized by Wisdom in Nature. And it's part of a theme, personal and collective liberation through the power of felt experience. And we're going to start with the organizers of today's event, myself and Shumaisa. We're just going to share what's the sort of driving force? Why is this important? This topic? Why do we feel it's important and relevant? And we'll speak for about 5 minutes each, and then we'll have another aspect we'll share briefly on. So in terms of why is this important? Shmesa, would you be happy to go first with that? Cool.
Sure. Yeah, so for me, the why has to do with its tensions are just part of being in relationship, um, including just with ourselves as an individual. Um, for example, we might have values, different kinds of values, and me, like personally, I can't actualize all of them. They will be in tension with each other in circumstances, and I think that's like, yeah. So in relationship with people beyond ourselves, they come up. That's part of being human, and I think that there, I kind of relate it to like an idea or a uh, I don't know. In Islam, one of the verses in the Quran has to do with diversity of people and how God created diversity of people so that we may know one another, and so the idea of like unity. So for unity to be a concept, there has to be diversity. If there's sameness, there's no concept really of unity. And I think that tensions um, are like a way for uh, growth and like generative growth and evolving and healing. And it's just part of like nature. It's part of our nature. It's part of how this world is, and it's very intentional. And to work with it is part of, I mean, I'm partly speaking from my spiritual kind of perspective, but it's so universal too. It's like in all kinds of spiritual traditions, the idea of how to navigate tensions in a way like, and come to kind of a more whole and a, a peaceful place. What's So that's kind of the why. I guess I won't go into the what, but it just feels like it's an intentional way we as humanity are, as individuals are, and it shows up a lot in our own personal universe of our embodied self, and then when we um, meet with other individuals who are also a whole universe of um, of emotions, of lived experience, of physicality, and yeah. So I'll stop there.
Great. Thanks, Shumesa. And yeah, so Shumesa, you have some background conversation happening in another room, I think, with some, because you're
Yeah, sorry about
in
that.
someone else's place. Okay, part of life. Cool. Okay, great. So I'll share a little bit about why this is important from my perspective, and I'm going to sort of look at this in a slightly global way, in the kind of structures that are dominating and that we've been conditioned into are ones where which I would say are quite patriarchal, quite a top-down kind of control. The idea of a leader is someone who tells us and who knows what to do, and they lead and people follow. So there's these kinds of this paradigm where certain, I guess, roles and relational dynamics are articulated in a way where it's very much people being led and domination, and that's the kind of paradigm we have of domination of people and domination of nature. It's not a partnership. It's not relational. It's not like all voices matter. And so this work of working with tensions, I see as part of a shift that is needed culturally in society, and that in our own units where we can do that, we can embody the change that's needed. And what often happens when there's tension is we're programmed to go into fight or flight mode. And we can begin to have some sort of enemy image of the other person. We may not call it that, but there can be some characteristics of us versus them. And we're in this fight flight mode where the options become very limited of what we're going to do. And I kind of go back, Mark shared something around tensions being information. And I've read, and that resonates with me, that's what tensions that we feel in the body. So it's important to have bodily awareness, that they provide information. They're communicating something. And the experience of the bodily experience is it's there in the body as an experience because we're meant to experience it. And so to actually allow ourselves to experience it, it's not just intellectual information, it's also an embodied information, to actually feel it without resistance. And when we can do that, it can give us some direction around where we sit in relation to something that can be the beginning of a dialogue, a conversation, which isn't about us versus them. Bodily experiences usually point to some need. And I'm using a kind of nonviolent communication framework here, just going to draw on that bodily experiences, emotions, usually indicate a need being met or a need being unmet. So that's really useful information if we begin to unpack what's going on for us. And that gives us understanding of ourselves. And it can also open up dialogue for understanding of somebody else, because if we can have the conditions where that communication can happen as to what's going on for us, what need may be met or unmet, then that opens up a dialogue where there can be a conversation in terms of both perspectives and hearing those perspectives and experiences. And so I think, undoing this kind of let's go into enemy image states and into this relational states, I think it enriches our relationships, and it gives us more understanding of ourselves, because we can then have a dialogue and get real feedback from somebody else. And it also is, I think, a core component of building community, and a sense of real belonging, authentic belonging. So it's part of this shift where we can allow all voices, all experiences to matter, and they all provide some information that we can have space for to build something that is beyond this patriarchal paradigm of domination of nature. Even storms are information that perhaps that something, and the frequency of storms and flooding and so on, that too is information that we can take on board as well, the voice of nature as well. So that's my bit on why this is important. We're now going to go into, and you will do this yourselves as well, we'll go into the experience, our experience of tensions and conflict in groups and teams. And myself and Shumaisa will speak for about 3 minutes each on this, on our experience of tensions and conflicts in groups and teams or movements. We're going to look at it through two kind of lenses. What are some of the barriers or obstacles? What has hindered the resolution or the processing of conflict, of tensions? What's been an obstacle to that? And what has helped? What sort of qualities have we discovered have tended to help towards resolution and processing of tensions, of conflict? Okay, and I'm also going to add this, preface it with this, that I see myself as a student, a lifelong student of this, as well as someone who does facilitate around this and attempts to be a practitioner. It's ongoing learning. So just to kind of preface it with this. So I'm going to ask Shumaisa, do you want to go first? Are you okay going first? Cool. Okay. I'll just mute myself.
So what gets in the way? In my experience, what gets in the way is the avoidance of avoidance of going into tensions, which is deep, which is understandable, because I think generally for many people, including myself, probably for a long time, it's something we're conditioned to avoid, or at least conditioned to avoid, to go into more wholly. I think there's probably a spectrum in terms of the avoidance. And yeah, in a nutshell, I think that's what gets in the way. Either complete avoidance, which is an extreme case, or going into it somewhat, but like I don't want to say superficially, but really, I think like it's kind of like, I see it as like almost compost, or some kind of like akin to those processes where something is transformed from one thing to another. And compost, things we consider as like waste and festering, is composted into something really fertile and life-giving, really, even. And but there's a completion, there's a kind of alchemy, there's a process. If it doesn't happen fully, it's kind of like not either not done, or eventually just takes a long time. And so I think that's what I've seen, is that either there's a complete avoidance, or people do engage to some degree, but it's really still avoiding some critical processes and critical points that are likely uncomfortable, maybe deeply uncomfortable, but through going through it, it would just be more freeing for a lot, everyone involved. And that those are the barriers. And like the inverse is where I think what supports that is where people have a shared commitment to going into it in a more whole and full way, and capacity. So either they come in with the capacity, or they already have some capacity, or adequate capacity to be in discomfort, all the people involved, or if they don't, then they are committed to bringing in like support that facilitates that being in discomfort in a way that's holdable, like and can take people through the process in a caring and supportive way. That's really it. That's what I observed. And I guess I would say that the latter is very rare. I can't even say that I've personally been in a situation where all parties have that. I have kind of, as a sort of somewhat distant person to a conflict, observed or learned of that happening, where all people were committed and got the support to like hold space and help them go through that. But yeah, it's not widespread.
Okay, thank you, Shumaisa. So just let that sink in. We can take a breath, be aware of our bodies if we want to. Okay, so I'll say a little bit, follow on from Shumaisa, what she shared in relation to my experience of tension and conflict in groups and teams, and what's been an obstacle, what has helped. I guess it links in with some of what Shumaisa shared, that one of the things that doesn't help is the belief that we're not going to get anywhere. And it's also quite normal to have that belief, because often there's not been a lot of success that many of us had when engaging in conflict. And so we come with our own histories, you know, and conditioning of the past. So if we want to move into a different paradigm, you know, we need to look at this belief that we're not going to get anywhere, because that itself is an obstacle of not getting any and leading us to not getting anywhere. So there's a need for trust. There's a need for there to be trust that we can move somewhere. And in that, two polars is this one where we can come in and want to engage, but we might have a predetermined outcome out of fear that it may go somewhere else. We're focused on the outcome. And so the having a predetermined outcome is gonna, in my experience, that completely shuts off or massively shuts off the capacity to listen. And what helps is the willingness to not know where this is going to go and to just be open. That's the same with decision making, the same with conflict, to be open and willing to feel discomfort that might come up. Wanting a predetermined outcome is a way of also not feeling discomfort and hearing things that might be difficult. Also, that can get in the way is the belief that conflict or tension indicates wrongness, that either I'm being blamed, I've done something wrong, and therefore that leads to me wanting to defend myself, or somebody else has done something wrong. So in a way, that language can be a hindrance. That was wrong, you know. It's a, you know, in NVC, nonviolent community, that becomes a kind of judgment. I think it's Rumi's. It's a quote of Rumi. You know, what is it? Beyond wrongdoing and right doing is a field. I'll meet you there. So just to continue then as well, what's relevant, what's important consideration is the container within which a conversation happens. I don't know if anyone's had success with text-based methods of trying to resolve conflict, whether through text or through email, but I would just not really want to go there. You know, it can be part of, but by and large, I've found that not to be a way to resolve it. And we live in a very text-based digital world. So to speak, to call, and create the, you know, in preparation, have a container in advance, knowing that it's going to be a conversation. Parties know that, ideally in person, but video call or audio call if not. And to have spaciousness and to have the necessary time as well. I was once involved with a couple of other people, and they said two things that we just weren't going to get anywhere. It was clear, because they restricted the time to less than the agreed one, as though it was nothing, no big deal. And then they also said, well, we don't think it's worth going into it because we'll just go around in circles. And, you know, so the container was just like, there wasn't any space within that container to have the conversation. So if we have time and we know there's time and the other person's willing to give time and we're willing to give time, that really sets a healthy relational aspect. I'll just be brief with the other things. Also to be proactive in feeling something and proactively reaching out. Look, I'd really like to talk about this. Otherwise, we can build up resentment, and then just it gets harder that way. And yeah, maybe we need support. Maybe we would need someone else to be there with us and to have an agreed person. So thinking, okay, this is uncomfortable. What do I need that will support me to be uncomfortable, and to have the conversation about that? So there's a setting up as well of this. One of the things that massively helps, just a simple tool that's used in nonviolent communication, I found, is observation. Just to start off with what happened and to speak of that. So then you can have a shared reality. So it's not one person's perspective or another, but they use the term like, imagine like a video camera that is playing what happened. And so sequentially in time, this happened, someone said this, then someone did this, and someone. So if we can agree and have that shared reality, that I found is really powerful. It's like, what's that going to do? But it's then we begin to just see together what actually happened. And that is so simple, but so powerful. And in one conflict I had, that was just like, it just opened up and we came to an understanding just through that, really. So I'm going to pause. I've probably gone a bit longer than I meant to, and we're going to hear from yous, but we're going to just pause the recording. And Shumaisa, if you can just do that. Great. So some of the aspects that were shared in relation to conflicts in teams and groups that were shared by participants. I've named some of the themes. One of the themes was strong, uncomfortable emotions that can be an obstacle because they're uncomfortable. We don't want to go there. And then blame and judgment. So if we get into that blame and judgment kind of paradigm, that can be a hindrance. I guess if people are blamed or judged, then they want to defend themselves. It was mentioned that the value of an external wise facilitator can be really helpful, a kind of mentor in the process. It's a bodily experience when we go into tension and conflict, and so the body needs to feel safe, and that therefore re-emphasizing the value of a container that can allow for that, and there's a clear intention. Everyone knows what they're there for. There can be transparency, there can be trust. And then there's the dominant culture, which can be an obstacle. It likes separation, it likes ongoing conflict. And so it's not in its interest for there to be conflict that is processed and togetherness being equality. Having a clear purpose can be useful, that it doesn't have to be that everyone agrees with everything. There can be an understanding. It doesn't mean that everyone has to be best friends, but there can be an understanding and still moving forward in some way. So there's some of what I noted that was shared in the main group, and we're just going to pause the recording again. Wonderful. So we've just been through a coaching process where one of the participants, he was willing to come forward with an example of an interrelational tension that he had experienced actually quite recently. And we can call it, there was an empathy space, and empathy was offered for that individual to share what happened, to give a kind of observation level description of what happened. And we held that sharing with empathy and invited what he was feeling and experiencing internally and what his needs were. So kind of using a nonviolent communication model for those who are familiar with that. And the overall process was described as healing. There's a softening and a clarity as to what happened, because at the moment of that interaction that was difficult, there was an experience of activation. So the feedback that people have just shared has been one of gratitude for being in this space, for the spaciousness, to be able to hold this kind of conversation in a space where we're intentionally giving it the time. And we're left considering how we want to continue to potentially have this kind of space available more, maybe more frequently on a regular basis. So that's something we need to think about, our capacity to do that. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you soon. So we can stop the recording.